Hello everyone, my name's Brody, and on today's episode of Brody's Learning Adventure, we'll be learning about progressivism, consumerism and leisure time. Industrialization led to long hours in the factories, but unlike farmers, factory workers and the wealthy often had days off. In the late 1800s, as leisure time became more common, so did activities such as stopping in department stores, which encouraged consumerism via advertisements. Consumerism is increasing consumption, focuses on consumption and purchasing. Amusement parks such as Coney Island in New York, vaudeville circuses and other theater, and world fairs where consumers, merchants, and innovators came together. Baseball and other spectator sports, including basketball and college football, as well as participatory sports such as tennis, golf, and cycling. New kinds of American jazz such as ragtime and early jazz. Corruption in the Gilded Age. Political parties used illegal means like bribes and extortion, and legal means like convincing the poor to vote a certain way by promising them jobs to control elections. These organizations were called political machines, and their leader was the boss. The most famous political machine was New York's Democratic Tammany Hall, led by William Major Boss Tweed, who is said to have stolen millions of dollars from the city. The Progressive Movement. President Garfield, and no, not Garfield the cat, who took office in 1881, saw that reform was needed. But he was assassinated before he could implement reforms. Some people known as socialists believed that government should take complete ownership of corrupt businesses. Others known as progressives thought the government should regulate, not control. They aimed to democratize American society, and many of their reforms were to give the people a greater say in government. The progressive movement in the 1890s aimed to fix social and economic problems, particularly in cities. Muckrakers. The progressives gained support for their cause from journalists known as muckrakers, who exposed the muck of society. Famous muckraker included Ida Tarbell, who exposed the oil trusts in her book, The History of the Standard Oil Company, 1904. Upton Sinclair, who wrote about the meatpacking industry in his novel The Jungle, 1906, and Jacob Riis, who displayed tenement life in his book of photographs, How the Other Half Lives, in 1889. Another muckraker, Lincoln Steffens, exposed political machines. Reformers and their projects. Many of the most active progressives in the country were middle-class women, who were all educated but were expected to stop working when they got married. By the turn of the century, families tended to be smaller, and technology, like the vacuum cleaner, helped with housework, freeing up more of women's time to create change. Political reform. Supported by President Arthur, the Pendleton Civil Service Act, 1883, created a civil service exam to evaluate job candidates on the basis of merit, putting an end to the spoil system at the federal level. Wisconsin held the first primary election in 1903, prompting voters to become more involved in national politics. Oregon introduced voter initiatives for citizens to propose laws, referenda to approve laws, and recalls to remove officials before the end of their term, allowing voters more control over state politics. Adopted in 1913, the 16th Amendment allowed Congress to levy an income tax, which gave government funding to do, in the progressives' view, great things. Ratified in 1913, the 17th Amendment gave the people the right to elect their senators directly rather than through the often corrupt state legislature. Education reform. Progressives like John Dewey advocated changes in public education to place greater emphasis on understanding rather than on memorization. Settlement houses offered some of the first kindergarten classes. Compulsory education laws were designed not only to educate children, but to eliminate child labor. Anti-alcohol reform. Temperance. Organizations like the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League worked to prohibit alcohol, which they saw as the cause of social problems. Temperance means abstaining from drinking alcohol. Temperance activist Carrie Nation charged into saloons and destroyed liquor bottles with an axe. Ratified in 1919, the 18th Amendment began prohibition, the period during which the production, sale, and transport of alcohol were illegal in the U.S. Labor reform. Since children could be paid less than adults, child labor was commonly used. Many people advocated placing limits on child labor, but congressional limits were deemed unconstitutional. In 1905, a socialist union called the Industrial Workers of the World was established and it welcomed women, minorities, and others who could not join the American Federation of Labor, aka the AFL. Following the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Company factory fire in New York, following the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Company factory fire in New York, which killed nearly 150 workers, mostly young women, who were locked inside by the company owners to prevent theft. Oh, and a shirtwaist is a common term for a lady's shirt during the early 20th century. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union advocated for increased workplace safety. In 1912, Massachusetts created the first minimum wage law. Women's rights. When slavery was banned, many former abolitionists turned their attention to women's suffrage. In 1869, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or the NASA, was formed, and its leader included Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Anna Howard Shaw, and Carrie Chapman Catt. The 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. At last, women have the right to vote. If you want to hear this in song form, go to Schoolhouse Rock's episode, Suffer Until Suffrage. One of most famous female reformers of the time was Mary Harris Jones, better known as Mother Jones, who helped organize numerous labor strikes. Anti-discrimination movements. The American Jewish Committee and the Anti-Defamation League fought anti-Semitism. The Society of American Indians advocated for Native American rights, and the Mexican-American Mutualistas assisted those living in the barrios, which are labor camps or prominently Spanish-speaking neighborhoods. Mutualistas are a community based on aid groups. Other groups facing discrimination included Catholics, Asians, and African Americans. Within the African American community, two major schools of activism emerged. One was led by Booker T. Washington, who believed that education and financial stability were the keys to equality. That is, if African Americans preserved equality, would automatically follow. Washington struck the Atlanta Compromise with Southern white leaders, which stated that African Americans should be resigned to white political rule as long as they could receive education and economic equality. On the opposite side of the spectrum was Webb Du Bois, who believed that legal equality for African Americans would put an end to injustice. Du Bois used the term the talented tenth to describe a class of leaders in the African American community that he believed would help create social change. In 1881, Washington founded the Tuskegee Institute, an agricultural and industrial school in Alabama. And in 1909, Du Bois helped found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, pronounced NAACP. It remains one of the most influential civil rights organizations in the U.S. Another significant African American figure of the time was George Washington Carver, a member of the Tuskegee faculty. Carver revolutionized Southern agriculture by developing hundreds of uses for peanuts and other crops that were alternatives to cotton. Here's a quiz to see if you've been paying attention. What is a political machine? What is the main difference between socialist beliefs and progressive beliefs? Who was Ida Tarbell? Why were many reformers middle-class women? What happened during the Triangle Shirtwaist Company factory fire? When was suffrage granted to women? What did Booker T. Washington and Webb Du Bois disagree about? Pause the video now to think of the answers for yourself. On to the answers. 1. Political machines are political parties that use illegal and illegal means to control election outcomes. 2. Socialists believe that government should take complete ownership of corrupt businesses. Progressives thought the government should regulate, not control. 3. She exposed the oil trust in her book, The History of the Standard Oil Company. 4. They were well educated at a time but were expected not to work. 5. Nearly 150 workers, mostly young women, were killed because they were locked inside by the company owners to prevent theft. 6. Suffrage was granted to women in 1920. 7. They disagreed about whether African Americans sought to focus on economic freedom or political freedom first. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that way you won't miss any of my new episodes. This is Brody signing out.